You know, we like that smile when we see our guests smile from the intros.
I'm sorry. I was vibing with the beat. My son makes beats. I was like, yeah, like,
Oh,
ooh, yeah.
does he?
Yeah.
Oh, we might have to chat with you afterwards. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning back into Unfiltered, Unspoken podcast. And as we told you, we're going to continue to share life experiences to help someone to start the journey to healing. We have a wonderful guest. Again, all our guests are wonderful, but we have Wendy Olson here today. She has an incredible story to share, and we cannot wait to get into it. Wendy, thank you for being a guest. It's an honor. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, such a privilege to be here. Greatly appreciated. So I am Wendy Olson. I'm a healing coach. I walk with women through their stories of past hurts and traumas, guide them to freedom and healing. I also run a nonprofit that I'm the founder and executive director of, working with women that are survivors of domestic violence and/or sexual exploitation. I myself live with complex trauma and PTSD. So yeah, all the things, all the acronyms, got them all. If you name it, I'll probably have it.
Sorry about that. Okay, so wonderful to have you on. But we normally start with everybody at the beginning. So, what was life like, during childhood? What was your home unit like? Did you experience any trauma um, prior to 8 years old? How were things? How was life?
Yeah. So, I think we do have to go all the way back, right? When I'm talking about like where I came from, I like to, my story is a little bit different than the typical, right? So, I grew up half of my life with three parents and the other half of my life with just my mom. So I grew up in a household with two grandparents and my mother. I was basically my grandparents' fourth child. I grew up on Long Island until the age of 9. And then me and my mom just moved down to Texas after I turned 9 and grew up for the rest of my childhood in Houston, Texas. I grew up with a narcissistic parent. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of emotional abuse, neglect, all the things that just kind of build through that kind of relationship, that kind of dynamic. Which propelled me into like the teen years of dealing with, I was like steeped in the purity movement culture of the Southern Baptist Church. And so that also led to so many other things when I left home, to where it was, I was raped at the age of 18 and again at the age of 20. I was in 2 physically abusive relationships. My first when I was 18, my second to a person I was married to for 6 years. Between then, there was sexual exploitation and some other things that just like everything that happens in our childhood affects like how we affects everything later, right? It's not like it's something came first in order for these other things to happen. So I like to say that we absolutely have to go back to the beginning to say, hey, this happened first. This laid the groundwork for all the other trauma that I endured, we endure.
So, can we go back to your childhood and dealing with the narcissistic parent? Can you tell us some of the things that you went through?
So, like I said, I'm kind of like my grandparents' fourth daughter, right? So they had 3 daughters. One daughter, my mom is the oldest. One daughter was still living in the house when I was born. She had just graduated high school. So I ended up being like that fourth daughter to them. Very close with my grandparents, being raised by them, being, just, I had a very close relationship with both of them. Where my mother, the relationship with her was like, even though I'm her child, I'm the one parenting her. I'm the one taking care of her, making sure that she doesn't have another meltdown or episode or, whatever. And even if she does, I have to somehow like be the mediator, be the peacekeeper, and so there's a lot, and always trying to gain that parent's affection because they don't they don't give it willingly, right? Trying to gain that affection and just the attention of like, hey, I'm here, look at me, but also kind of flying under the radar because you just never knew when she was going to like lose it, like pop off or whatever, and just create a whole scene. So yeah, finding that balance as a small child of like, okay, I want my mom's love and affection. And also I just don't want too much attention because that creates bad things, if that makes sense.
And what particularly was she dealing with, or was that just kind of like her personality style? Was it an actual, diagnosis, or is that just how she rolled?
Man, I would love to know what her diagnosis is. When I was in my 20s, I worked in a bar, and and someone came up to me and they're like, "Oh, what are you studying in school?" And at that point, I was studying psychology, and they were like, the type of people that go to school for psychology are usually trying to figure out what's wrong with them. And I was like, interesting point. I'm going to school to try to figure out what's wrong with my mother. But thank you for the insight. So, yeah, I don't know what her diagnosis is other than to say I know that she is a narcissist, which I only probably learned maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I'd never really heard that term, never really heard about narcissistic personality disorder, but I just imagine that like that's how everyone's parents talk to them and deal with them. And then when you get out into the real world and you're like, oh, this is how, my parents talk to me. This is how my mother interacted with me. And people get like a weird look on their face. You're like, oh, okay, that's not normal, I guess. So yeah, stumbling upon that. But what was she dealing with? I actually don't know. It doesn't have a name.
So what are some of the like traits that she had? Did she scream at you? Did she like, I love you today, you're a nuisance tomorrow? Like, what are some of the things that she did that affected you? And
Juggling between just those really extreme emotions, right? Either completely detached, wants nothing to do with me, just kind of in her own little world, or like I'm the reason everything is wrong in her life. It's just never really a balance. And I can recall a handful of times, and I don't even need a whole hand. I maybe need like 2 or 3 fingers to be like, this was fun. This thing we did that one time when I was 14, that was fun. And I remember her being playful and fun and like, oh my gosh, this is like what a parent on TV looks like, because I had nothing else to gauge it against. TV was like, in the 80s and 90s, TV raised us. So I'm like, well, that parent does this, but my parent doesn't. But there would be a handful of times where she did. Even now, our relationship like is pretty detached. I keep a pretty firm boundary between me and her. But if she's ever like called out on her shit, immediately she goes to blame whoever is trying to call her out on it. So she did something a couple years ago. I called her to let her know I was upset about it. Somehow it was my fault. I'm the reason she did that. And like, okay, I've had too much therapy now to believe that. So let me just say, what I said is, you upset me. What you did was wrong. And that's it. I don't need an apology. I don't need you to try to make it better. That would be nice. I know that that's not going to come from you, but at the same time, I just need to say what I need to say and let you know where I'm at. Whatever you do with that is no longer my problem. So just the interactions with her, those are just a few examples of some of the interactions with her. But basically everything turns back towards her taking the attention. Like she needs to be front and center by any means possible.
Do you feel that your grandparents, were fully aware and tried to compensate, for that with you? And, what kind of things did they do to maybe try to compensate or, kind of make you feel better or to take your mind off of that?
Yeah, I feel like I was, I know I was the most spoiled, like grandchild, I remember my grandfather passed away in 2009. And when I I live in Texas, and then all my family lives in Florida now. And when I showed up, they were like, you were his favorite. And I was like, I always thought that I was their favorite. I'd like to think that I'm somebody's favorite. But it was just, that made me feel a little bit better, because I do feel like they overcompensated for the lack that was there. Almost like to say, hey, we're sorry that like this is your parent. So let me step up in all of these other ways to be the parent that you actually need. I mean, for all intents and purposes, my grandparents were my parents. So yeah, when I think of like my mother, there's my mother, and then there's Nan, who was my grandmother. She was more my mother than my mother ever was.
That's deep. That's deep. So did any of these behaviors at home, I mean, any of the things that your mother from home, did it cause any issues in school? Like, did you have any rebelliousness in school? Did you get in trouble in school? Because we want folks to see like how these traumas affect you emotionally, in other settings as well.
Yeah, because it's not just one thing, it's a progression, right? No, I was like the good kid in school. The worst thing I ever did was I was a smart ass to my teachers. And there was a few of them that I didn't like. We didn't get along because I basically told them they were terrible teachers and I was smarter than them. But past that, I was a really good kid. I never got in trouble. In fact, I did get a detention one time, and I brought it to the principal, and he laughed about it and tore it up because he knew that I was like a straight A student on the honor roll, did all these extracurricular activities, I was on the debate team and all those things. But I was like a really good kid in school, but also trying to be that achiever of like, I need to get straight A's. Maybe then like she'll pay attention to me. She'll be proud of me. Maybe she'll say nice things about me to her friends, like, oh, my daughter was on the honor roll, or my daughter made National Honor Society, or, whatever, but nothing, like zip, zero. But that really propelled me to work harder until I moved out of the house. And then I totally slacked off in college, but that's a whole nother story.
So it seems like, the kind of, I guess the residuals of the parenting, kind of positively helped you, in certain ways, but were there any, particularly negative kind of traits or I guess kind of moments you had, based on the fact that you were kind of yearning for your mother's love or parents' love? Did that create any stressful moments for you or negative moments for you?
I think, like for me personally, and I'm sure this happens with a lot of people, but you just become this people pleaser, right? And like inside the house, like that's one thing, but like you get out into the real world, and then I didn't grow up with a father, so automatically I'm searching for the love to fill the hole of like I never had a father. So there's that, coupled with the people pleasing. Now, when I start getting into relationships, I'm doing more than I'm comfortable with just to try to keep the love. But it's not love either. My idea of what love is only what I've seen demonstrated at home, which is pretty much nothing. So I'm yearning after whatever kind of love I have in my head of like what it looks like. Oh, does it look like this person on this TV show? Does it look, like the person on this movie? What does it look like? What does it look like for me? And then, the other part is like, at that point, you're just settling for crumbs, right? Because if you're starving, you're not looking for the steak. You're looking for like whatever kind of crumbs that you can gather up to eat because you're starving. So like it later affected love life, relationships, interactions with friendships, trusting people just in friendships, like just across the board.
And I was going to ask that, and you brought it up. I didn't hear you mention your dad. So how did that affect affect you? And I know I want that father role, but in what other areas that affect you having an absent parent in your life?
So I think my grandparents like really tried to fill that, and I mean naturally, right? You want to give your kid like whatever you feel like they don't have, and in some ways, I had a few examples of like what a male relationship should look like. But like my grandfather was very quiet. My grandmother, I always say I was raised in a matriarchy, not a patriarchy, because my grandmother, we used to call her the Godfather because like everything went through her. Anyway, um, but then like my grandfather was just very quiet and just, just pretty mostly agreeable. If he was mad about something, you might hear about it, but that would maybe be like once a year. He'd raise his voice. I had uncles that came and went. So that was kind of like, oh, okay, well, men don't stick around, and you develop these like false narratives of like why you shouldn't trust men. Already I have one that like never even met me and already he doesn't want to be a part of my life. And then I see like an example of like the way that my grandfather is with my grandmother, that my uncles are, the way that we were really close with all of our cousins. So it's like, I'm still getting mixed messages about what that relationship is supposed to look like, and searching for that, again, that love, like that attention from a male, daddy issues are real, like, yeah.
And I was going to ask, just to pick up real quick, did you ever get to meet him? Did you ever know who he was, his name or anything?
When I was 15, my mom told me what his name was, and she spent the entire day like digging through her closet trying to find a picture of him. And she never did. But I did a DNA test back in like 2018, and found it on ancestry.com, found some cousins, and found my aunt on that side, and so I know who he is, and he knows that I exist, but he's never responded to me ever.
Now, were you the only child of your mother's, or did she have any more?
Yeah, I'm an only child.
Okay, so you don't have to, deal with seeing her act right with other kids like that. Mind blows me every time, but at least you didn't have to deal with that. Now, how were your grandparents here until adulthood, or did?
Yeah, my grandfather passed away in 2009, so I was 28. Is that right? Yeah, 28 when he passed away, and then my grandmother just passed away in 2020. So I had them like most of my life. My grandmother had dementia for the last 8 years, so that was pretty rough. But she still remembered me, and she'd call me by like the nicknames that she had for me. I was telling Demetria, my grandfather used to call me Cookie, but she called me Lovey. And so the last time that I saw her, she called me Lovey, even though maybe she didn't remember my name, but you could see in her eyes she remembered me, and she didn't remember everybody. So I was like holding it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, my grandmother
That shows you were the favorite. Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I do want to ask, what was I going to ask? Was there, outside of your mother, did you have like, aunts and uncles? I know sometimes when you have that dynamic of when your grandparents are raising you, sometimes stuff gets murky with their actual children. Did you, have any issues there, or did any of your aunts and uncles resent your mother for, kind of leaving you in their care? How did that work itself out?
Very messy in the beginning for sure. My mom and her middle sister never really got along, like for years. They would always fight. Like we'd have Sunday dinners, and then they'd get into it, and like she would make me leave with her to go back home to my grandparents' house because we all live in the same house. And I would be mad because I would be with my cousins or whoever, and then I'd have to leave because she got upset. And so they always fought, which they're both like, they're like the same person. So like they fought all the time. But my youngest aunt, I was always very close with her. I mean, if you asked her, she would tell you that like I'm her other child. She has two other kids, but I always saw her more as like that big sister because she lived in the house that I grew up in for a while, like when I was born, when I was little. So yeah, I was always really close with her. And I think, after we moved down to Houston, I just like kept my silence for so many years about all the terrible things that were happening while I was down there with her. And my aunt didn't find out until like years later. And she was like, if we had known, we would have come down there and got you. And I believe that, but my silence was like bought and paid for, protecting my mother. I felt like she was my responsibility, which just irks the crap out of me to be like, as a 9-year-old child, I am taking care of my mother and like nobody sees that, So it feels like in that way I was like hung out to dry, like betrayed, just like, I still deal with a lot of that sort of resentment, but overall, I do believe that like my aunt and my grandmother were like there for me for as much as I would allow them to be in those younger years, all in the name of like protecting my mother.
Have you ever called your mother out, like in front of your aunts and your uncles and the family, like how she affected you, how she made you feel? And if you did, what was her reaction?
No. In fact, to this day, I would say like she has never been called out by like anybody. She lives with my aunt, my youngest aunt, and I'm very open with my family about, listen, I've told you for years that there are issues here. Y'all don't want to believe me? That's fine. Like, just discover for yourselves. And, they have to a certain extent. Calling her out, I think when I was younger and like she did things, it just never like, it was like, what's the point? It's like she has a prescription with which she sees the world, which is totally different from the reality everybody else sees. It's not just a different perspective. It's like a completely different lens. Like she's wearing purple glasses and all the rest of us have clear glasses. So it's like, there would be no gain from that for me to be like, hey, you really screwed up my entire life, but here we are, It'd just be no point.
What do you feel like was probably, even though I'll say this knowing that you've kind of already been through your healing journey and you probably have, forgiven where you needed to forgive, but was there a particular event or moment that, at the time was just, you threw your hands up, it was unforgivable to you, at the moment where you kind of just washed your hands clean of her?
Yeah, I would say there were, oh gosh, I don't think it was like one moment. I think it was like a buildup of like, you take enough shit that after a while you're just like, I'm just really done. Like it could be like the smallest thing, but you've done like 12 years of this like hard work and this mud, and then you're just tired, when I'm thinking of this story. When I was pregnant with my first child, he's 18. She hadn't paid the taxes on her house. And so she called me and she was like, hey, I'm going to have to move out of my house because they're going to take my house because I didn't pay my taxes. And so I think, I can come live with you and help you with the baby. And I'm like, 8 months pregnant, like newly married and like also dealing with an abusive husband at the time. And just like, this is not what I want. I called my grandmother because again, she's the godfather. And she said, okay, my grandmother's from Queens. So she's like, in no uncertain terms, Wendy, are you allowed to let her live with you? And I was like, okay, I don't want her to. And she's like, no, you tell her no, and I will handle it. And she did. She paid taxes on her house so she didn't have to lose her house or anything. But like little things like that for over the span of from like, what is that? Like 18, like adulthood, right? 18 to mid 30s, little things like that. And then, if I didn't help, then I'm the devil, So little things like that, to where it was just like, well, this is who she is. And I don't need to be a part of that. But here we are. And then I think, there's the last straw, and then there's like the last straw. And so like, I would say like the last straw was she moved out of the state and didn't tell me, and then acted like that was my fault. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. It still affected me emotionally, because I had to hear from my cousin, like, oh, hey, your mom lives here now. And I was like, excuse me? Called my best friend, cried for a good hour, and then confronted her about what she had done. And somehow it ended up being my fault to her. But I was like, oh, okay. It was just like another, like there were already 12 nails in the coffin. And this was like just another one. I was like, oh, okay, well, our relationship will never be that. As much as I have hope, like you always have hope that like one day they'll turn around and want to have a relationship with you. But like, she's almost 70. I don't really feel like that hope is on the horizon anymore.
Wow.
Has she? Oh, I'm sorry. Trying to.
Oh no, go ahead. You can go ahead, Sid. Go ahead and have your question. Go ahead. No time.
Have you seen that she's had, healthy, successful, lasting relationships with anybody else? Like,
No.
or is it just doesn't work out with anybody? It's not just a you problem.
No, thank God. Oh my gosh, if she had a really healthy marriage, I'd be like, what's wrong with me?
I would be offended. That's why I asked. I'm like, some people move on to change, but the damage is done.
I can say I am jealous of the relationship she has with her pets, but not with me. I mean, past that, no. She's been married several times. She's engaged a few times. She's not really good at keeping friends, holding down a job. Like, there's just all those things that like she just can't fully function doing. She cannot maintain relationships at all. She's not very close with my kids. She's more of a taker, right? And I don't want people to take from my kids. So I keep a pretty healthy like limit there. But no other relationship. So yeah, a little solace in like, oh, it's not just me.
I was going to ask your mother, what weaknesses and what strengths came out of your childhood traumas from her?
Weaknesses. I mean, the people pleasing is still pretty strong, holding in there. I fight against that probably every day. Strengths to come. I am resourceful as fuck. Like, just, I'm really resourceful. I'm also great at dealing with crazy. Like the craziest thing can happen, and I'm like, oh, this feels like home. This feels normal to me. Like, I can figure this out. It's not a problem. I'm a great problem solver. I was very independent, resilient, from an early age. Having the responsibility at such an early age makes me tired now, but really good on that front. And I think going back to like the weaknesses, not only people pleasing, but just not knowing how to like handle navigate a relationship really long term, not knowing what to look for in a partner for years, and then taught no skills on like regulating my nervous system, or how to not fly off the handle, because when everything in your sphere and everything comes into your sphere as a catastrophe, like you carry that into your life as like it's either all good or all bad. And I still I still feel that a lot of the time. When like something comes up, I immediately go to catastrophizing it. You know, it's like the worst thing that's ever happened in the world. So like not having that medium of like, I can only see in like, it's either really good or really bad. And so finding that middle ground of, which has taken a lot of years of like, no, this is just something else to come into my path. This is not the end of the world. So trying to figure out how to navigate that. Yeah.
Are there as much work as you've done to kind of far remove yourself from that situation? Are there any like similarities you feel like you've picked up, either personally or in regard to your own parenting? Like, have you noticed anything like that, even though you've done a lot to stray from that?
Yeah. Which is a hard pill to swallow, right? Like I would say, oh gosh, with my son, I definitely had a lot of the same parenting. I think you don't even want to call that techniques, but parenting styles of like the way that either my grandmother or her had taught me, like somehow they intertwined, even though I did try to reach back more for like the way that my grandmother parented more than her, but it's just like something just would come out when you're not like dealing with your trauma, which I did not for years, like well into like my mid-30s. It's going to come out sideways, and it came out in like just not being able to regulate myself. And kids can be so triggering that like I just didn't realize what that was. I didn't realize that that's what was happening to me. I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm as like mentally ill as my own mother is, you know, and rallying, like fighting against that, not realizing, one, I'm not, and two, there's a way through it. I think that was probably really challenging and sobering too, to be like, oh, okay, I did all of these things wrong. And, you know, my oldest got the better part of me much later in his life than my youngest does. Which I always say, like, you burn the first pancake, right? So like your first child is like your practice run. Not fun though. Not fun at all.
So I'm gonna go into you left the household, and first I want to say thank you for being very transparent about everything. So you left the household, and at 18, you said you were sexually assaulted, and we can say rape. You were raped.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I was actually supposed to go to college in Rhode Island, and I turned down that scholarship for a stupid reason. And so I ended up at U of H, mid-semester, mid-year, second semester, rooming with my best friend that had also turned down a scholarship somewhere, and met this guy. And she likes to say that I gave my attention to the first boy who looked my way, which I would say like 100%. I mean, I hated her for saying that at the time, but it was 100% accurate. We began dating. I found out he was a drug dealer. Still, again, with the people pleasing, like, hey, I just want to be the cool girl. I just want attention. I just want to be loved, right? Stayed with him. I ended up over spring break. We had a party on our floor, and we got drunk on the floor and played spin bottle with everybody. I don't remember a part of that night. I remember up to a point, and then that's it. And then I just remember like late at night walking back to my room, and then waking up the next morning and not really remembering anything else. And in that time when I was blackout drunk, he had raped me, which I didn't actually find out until like several months later.
Jeez. That was, I don't even know how to phrase it, but I guess, once you guys decided to go forward with the relationship, was it a matter of you feeling kind of stuck, no other options, or that's what you were just supposed to do based on what is happening, or did you really feel some way about him, or feel strongly about him where he just didn't feel that same way with you? Like how did that kind of manifest itself?
Yeah, this is super fresh to me because this is literally like what my book is about. But yeah, so I have a lot of things from that. So I mentioned earlier I was raised in the 90s during the purity movement of the Southern Baptist culture. And so I, believe that you're only supposed to sleep with one person for the rest of your life, that you're married to this person, blah, blah, blah. So we had dated. This night happened. And then maybe like a week or two after that, we had been sexually intimate for the first time, according to me. Like, this is like my idea of this. Like, this, like, I'm an adult now, we're probably going to get married anyway. Everybody on the floor just thought we were like the most adorable people because we lived on the same floor in our dorms. He did all of the things that like you hope somebody does when you're dating them, like brings you flowers, comes up to work to surprise you, like just is just always there for, like all the, like the grown up, like boyfriend things. Like he did, he checked like the boxes, and he did this, he was also a drug dealer too, but like that to me was like, oh, it's fine. He's like an entrepreneur, So then one day when we were sitting across the hall in a friend's room, and for some reason, everyone, like, we used to all just gather together, right? And so like there's like 5 or 6 of us in the room, and everybody's talking about the first time that they had sex. And so I explain our first time, and like he's sitting, he's leaned up against a dresser. I'm sitting like crisscross on the floor. He's leaned up against this dresser. Everyone else is, seated. And he just very nonchalantly says, that wasn't our first time. And I kind of like look at him, and I was like, it wasn't? And he goes, no, our first time was that night you got really drunk with everyone on the floor and played spin the bottle. And like, I was like, my face was just like complete and utter shock of like processing what he's saying. And then he says, I wasn't about to let someone else get what was mine. And I was like, even my heart now just like stops, right? Like everything has just like, someone's hit the pause button. Everything has just stopped. And when like I like regain consciousness, I look around the room to the other people that are in the room. And there were other women in the room too, at like trying to gain, validation of like, did he just openly admit to a room of people that he raped me? And none of them would look at me. They all broke eye contact as quick as I looked at them. They started sipping their beer, whatever, and changed the subject. And I just remember getting up and walking across the hall and closing the door behind me. And like, I don't really remember a lot after that on that specific day, but it kind of sent me into this whole like questioning everything about my life. A few weeks of hiding out in my friend's room, because I wouldn't stay in my room because then he would know where I was. So I stayed in my friend's room. Like this real existential crisis of like, I told the Lord, that I would only sleep with one person for the rest of my life. And this is the person that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. I'm going to have to, because this is the only way that this vow all works out, And so we spent several weeks apart. I didn't go to class. I didn't eat. I didn't my friends would bring me food and like try to like let me sleep and pretend I wasn't there, if he had come to the door. And then I went back to him, and we dated for a year and a half, and he was physically abusive very shortly after that. So, yeah.
Now, is this your kid's father, or
No.
you just at this point you just dated. So how long did you go through the abuse with him?
A year and a half. We dated for a year and a half, and I would
Uh-huh.
say within the first 6 months, it got physical. Up
So
until
you went.
when I left, yeah.
And what are some of the things that during the relationship, the abuse? What was some of the abuse that he caused? Because a lot of the abuse is a control piece. So if someone doesn't do something, or financial, sexual, emotional. So we have different forms when it comes to the abuse piece of it.
Yeah, mostly it was very physical, very controlling. He had money. I did not. He was also a trust fund kid, but I grew up poor, so didn't have any. So whatever he had, if he he would shower me with gifts and things like that to try to make up for whatever outburst he had at the time. He would get angry. He smoked a lot of pot, which made him really angry, ironically. And so he, would physically punch me, slap me, whatever was really that he felt like he needed to do. Which kind of correlates to the way that my mom treated me emotionally, of if I didn't behave or do what she wanted me to do, then she took away attention and withdrew herself, with the silent treatment and things like that. But he saw that as I need to be put back in line. So I need to be slapped or hit or whatever, punished, a punitive punishment, almost like a child in a lot of ways. Even though we were the same age, he would treat me like a child, for sure.
Now, did you go into, I guess, this relationship in particular? Do they know kind of about how you were raised, and the issues you were dealing with? Sometimes it feels like those extensions of those people from trauma in our lives, they kind of take the blueprint and just kind of run with it sometimes. So was it something that you kind of let him in on, or was it just a matter of finding the same type of personality to be with in that relationship?
We always, I heard this one time and I hate it, but we gravitate towards what's familiar, Oh, that stings every time I hear it though. But yes, because I believed that we were in love, and we talked about all of these things, and his upbringing, which the way he described is completely different than the reality of it. But being open and vulnerable and oh, my mother, blah, 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 this is how I grew up. I was raised in a 1-bedroom apartment with my mother, so all of these things he knew about me, because I've always just been that person that shares things pretty openly, even with the wrong people. And so just, yeah, I mean, I never thought about it as oh, he made sure to do his homework, right? Probably until a few years ago. And I was oh, it's not that they stumbled across me and they were lucky to find someone that they could abuse. It was he's taking notes, right? In several of my relationships where it wasn't just physically abusive, maybe it was sexually abusive or emotionally abusive. It was they knew what they were getting into. After a while, you start to feel like you're a target, right? And you're not, because if I say I'm a target, then that puts a lot of shame and responsibility on me. And I just don't believe that we should live like that. But to say that an abuser is meticulous in their search for their next victim, it's not hard. We're not hard to find, but they still study us, for sure.
Okay. And that's the truth. It's a vulnerability, and it's not like you had a vulnerability of love as well, coming from childhood and the piece of your mom. I want to ask, I know in the beginning of the intro, and I know we're going to respect this piece of it, You help women through sexual exploitation. Um, you've been through this. So I'm just going to ask, because we're not going to chime too deep into it, and we respect that piece of it. But can you tell folks how long you went through the sexual exploitation, and you're empowering women today, and when did it start and when did it end, and you're empowering women now through your personal experiences of that? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would say I was probably 20 years old when it started. There were at least two different avenues in which the sexual exploitation happened. And then probably up until about 22, when I left that life, I would say, yeah, 20 to 22. Um, for people, when you leave an abusive relationship, so this first relationship that I was in for a year and a half, I felt protected by him in the way that, like, financially, I had never been before. And so when I did decide to leave and just out on my own and like barely getting by, there were certain opportunities given to me to help me pay my rent, keep my lights on, pay my cell phone bill, things like that, that I would have considered my choices, but were later taught to me as, oh, like, if we actually had a choice, then that wouldn't have been the choice, right? So learning that about myself, and that comes as a new memory probably about 3 years ago, which is why I don't talk about it like too in depth, because there's still a lot of things that I'm exploring about that. But for that to come up as a new memory when it did, shortly after I had just started my nonprofit, I was like, okay, now I know this. I had this experience. I have an experience of intimate partner violence, domestic violence. To me, that's old hat. I'm like, I can do that all day long. But I also had that experience of sexual exploitation. So I know what that's like. So if I'm walking with someone through their own story of exploitation or trafficking or whatnot, I know exactly how she feels. I know the shame that she carries with her. I know that she's told herself this story to help her survive of like, I just did this was my choice to do this. But I also know the reality is, like, if we actually had a choice to choose, we would have chosen a different choice.
Absolutely. And did with that first relationship, did you get any feedback from your grandparents? What was, or did they even know what was actually, kind of going on? Did you share that with them?
No, I kept, because I knew the choices that I was making as far as like not going to school in Rhode Island like I was supposed to and things like that. I knew, like, their disappointment was like heavy on me. They never really they were never like the type of people that would like yell at you or try to punish, but they just, if I disappointed them, that felt like really heavy. So I didn't share that part of my life with them. Also, my grandmother, like I said, she's the godfather, but she always said, Wendy, if a man lays his hands on you, you wait until he falls asleep at night and you slit his throat. And I was like, okay, like, those were like, I wasn't doing what she taught me to do either. I'm not killing nobody. So I thought, oh my gosh, if I tell her, she's going to be mad that like this man is still walking the earth, So yeah, that part of my life, I don't think they ever knew about. I think maybe my grandmother did after I was older, and maybe we talked about I was in an abusive relationship, but no, I never really shared that with them.
So you've been through abuse almost your whole part of your life. When did you finally, the breaking point of it all, from childhood to rape to the sexual exploitation, and you had abuse after that as well, correct? So you're
Yeah.
going through all this abuse. What was the breaking point to say, I can no longer go through this anymore. I have to heal. It's time for me to heal.
I would, so I was in a 6-year relationship, married for 4, together for 6, in which he was extremely emotionally abusive, gaslighting, controlling, all the things. He was also physically abusive later in the relationship, and he tried to take my life in the very last weeks. I had already said I wanted a divorce. Was already planning on moving out. Like, my place wasn't ready yet. We were still cohabitating, but like we were separating. He was living his own life. I was living my own life. And one night when he came home and I wasn't there, he got upset, tore apart the house, like called the cops, everything. And he tried to like choke me and kill me. And I was already leaving him, but that was like the final, like, okay, if you don't leave, you will die. Like, if you even think about taking another step back, because we had separated before, if you even think about taking another step back, you won't make it next time. At that point, my son was 3, and I was like, I cannot put him through this. Like, I've already put him through enough in his life. He maybe will not remember it, but like his body will store all of this trauma for the rest of his life, right? And so when I left him, I'd like to say that that's when I started my healing journey, but it was not. There was a lot of drinking and drugs in between that time of just trying to cope, not dealing with the fact that someone that I was married to tried to kill me. Didn't deal with that, never pressed charges. The man still walks free today, free to abuse as he does. The following year, I met my now husband. We've been together 14 years. And yeah, when we came together, we were both a mess. But we were enough of a mess for each other that like we helped each other in some ways, and in other ways we were worse for each other. But it really wasn't until after my daughter was born that I was like, oh, either A, something is wrong with me, or B, I have some work to do. So trying to figure out what that was. Is there something wrong with me? Do I need to be medicated, or whatever it is? Because I cannot keep living my life like this and raise a daughter like this. I was having like mental breakdowns once a month, where before I probably had mental breakdowns like every other week, once a week. And I was like, oh, once a month is progress, but I can't keep doing this because I'm hurting my kids, but I'm hurting my partner in life as well. And so then I started exploring like what healing looked like, and I was probably like 34 maybe when I started naming some of the things that had happened to me, and being like, oh, okay, well, this thing that happened to me has a name. This thing was called rape. This other thing that happened is also called rape. And I still sometimes have an aversion to that word because it feels like so heavy and so weighty. And then like this thing that happened to me was emotional abuse. This thing that happened to me was emotional neglect, and being able to name these things and call them out for what they were. And in that, taking a little bit of my power back, but to say, okay, where am I carrying my shame with these things into my present life? Like, why are these things that happened 10, 20 years ago still affecting my everyday life? And how do I change that? So yeah, in my early to mid 30s is when I started actually doing some healing work. And I had left my ex-husband when I was 27. So a lot of years of just surviving, like just trying to get through.
Demetria, did you want to do your last question?
Yeah. I want to do a 2-in-1 real quick, and then I'm gonna go, and then Sid's gonna close it out. You said after all the abuse you went through drinking and drugs, we're almost at time, but I just want folks to see how abuse causes you to have a downer. If you could tell us 1 minute, um, like just some of the things you went through after that led into the drugs, drinking and drugs, and then can you tell the audience maybe 2 things that help you on your healing journey of the things that you went through?
Yeah. So I had used drinking, drugs, and even sex as like a coping tool, just a numbing, well, not a coping, like a numbing tool of like, this is just going to help me get through to that next day. This is just going to help me get through to whatever I need to survive at this moment. It's going to help me forget who I am and what I've had to go through. So short stints and bursts of that a lot, until I just really got sick of that. I think you have to get really sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's something my grandmother always used to say too. And you have to come to the end of that to be like, this is just not working. I'm still me. I wake up in the morning now hungover, and I'm still me. When you can't look at yourself in the mirror because you don't really recognize yourself, or you don't want to see yourself at all in the mirror, then you're not where you want to be, and I hope that that's like a wake up call of like, oh, okay, something needs to change. And I'd say probably the biggest thing on my healing journey has been the story work that I discovered maybe only 5 years ago. I'd been to therapy, seen counselors, everything, but doing the story work, which is what I do with clients now, was the thing that helped me see the patterns of my life and shed that shame that I carried with me for all those years. Of like, I just didn't wake up one day and decide I'm going to do drugs for 2 years straight, right? I coped my entire life doing X, Y, and Z, and then came to that as like there's nothing else. I've tried everything else. And then realizing that's just not who I wanted to be for the rest of my life.
That's wonderful. That's great. Kind of a good game plan to give our viewers, that may be going through the same stuff or trying to heal from the same stuff. So that's great. But we have gotten to almost our hour mark. And the last thing we like to do is what we call shameless plug. So you see your banner scrolling, across the bottom. You can let the viewers know anything that you have coming up, anything you want to draw traffic to, merchandise for sale, book for sale, how they can utilize any of your services. You have the floor.
Yeah, my very first book is coming out. I'm very excited about that. It comes out on my birthday, November 1st. I'll be 43 and releasing my new baby, which is my book into the world, called Quelling the Tempest, Discovering the Discovering the Warrior Within the Sexual Abuse Survivor. So look out for that. That'll be on Amazon. My nonprofit, we do a lot of work with survivors of domestic violence and sexual exploitation. It's called Grit Plus Gumption. Love some followers on Instagram for that. We have a very small following. You can also follow me on my social media at Mrs. Wendy J. Olson. And yeah, I guess that is it for now. Yeah, just my book is my everything right now, my sole focus.
Well, also you can promote your book on our platform and the Good Fight platform. I'm not for sure if you're in there, but we'll add you in there. And anyone that you want to reach out to share whatever you need in there. It's a journey of helping survivors or those that are going through healing, to share and on our platform. So I'll add you there, and you can also put in there, come follow you as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
My pleasure. It was an honor having you. Thank you for sharing your testimony. You have been through a lot in life, so just looking at you and the smile on your face, it speaks volumes on your healing journey. So that's the transparency that we want to bring is we can heal from our traumas. We just have to identify our traumas and to look at that mirror, because I always say the hardest thing is to face our reflection in the mirror. That is the most scariest thing and challenge. So you are doing that, and you've brought so much awareness to this as we kick into Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It's just an honor to have you on our platform and sharing your journey.
The honor is mine. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, ladies.
My pleasure. We want to thank everyone for tuning into Unfiltered, Unspoken podcast, where we're going to continue to share life experiences of others in hopes that someone will connect to start the journey to healing. As you heard Wendy's testimony, she went from childhood traumas of dealing with a narcissistic parent, but in the process, her grandparents were there to help as much as they could through her rape, through her sexual exploitation, through her abuse, to her healing. So please support Wendy. Please support her book. Please come follow her platforms and show some love. And we hope that someone is going to connect if you have been through something. And if you need to reach out to Wendy, we've shared all her information. So please reach out to Wendy. She's open and she'll be there for you as well. So thank you for tuning in to Unfiltered, Unspoken podcast, and we will see you soon.